Welcome to the Roy Morgan overview of trust and distrust in the charities sector. Roy Morgan's best known as Australia's leading consumer research and political polling company, but we also do extensive social research for governments, charities and other not-for-profits. So looking at trust. Trust is the foundation of all human connections, from intimate relationships to everyday business transactions. Trust acts as a stabilising force in a fractured world, fostering collaboration, resilience and social cohesion. It bridges divides, enabling individuals and organisations to navigate uncertainty and complex challenges with confidence and shared purpose. As Mark Benioff, the global CEO of Salesforce, famously says, trust has to be the highest value in your company, and if it's not, something very bad is going to happen to you. Deloitte in the US found that trusted companies outperformed non-trusted brands by 2.5 times, with 88% of customers who highly trust a brand more likely to buy it again. Crucially though, distrust is not merely an absence of trust. Distrust stretches relationships to breaking point, creating a toxic environment that destroys collaboration and destroys innovation. It breeds suspicion and anxiety, leading to inefficiency and conflict. And it has a material impact. Take Medibank, for example. Immediately following a single catastrophic data breach in late 2022, its soaring levels of distrust wiped close to $2 billion off Medibank's market value in a single day. So how do we measure trust and distrust? Since late 2017, Roy Morgan's continuously surveyed around 2,000 Australians monthly through our risk monitor. We ask them about which brands they trust and which they distrust. Crucially, we ask why they trust or distrust the brands they nominated, and we record exactly what they say. Net scores are calculated by subtracting distrust from trust, and this provides a full picture of how a brand is tracking, and it allows us to benchmark it against all others. The qualitative research is unique, open-ended, unprompted, and completely context-free. While everyone else measures trust, only Roy Morgan measures distrust. So now let's look at trust and distrust in action. This first slide shows key industry sectors' net trust and net distrust rankings. We roll up every mention of a brand in an industry into an aggregated industry sector and then report on that. For instance, last quarter I flagged that supermarkets' goodwill was being eroded by cost of living anxiety and by customer antagonism. The supermarket sector is the biggest loser this quarter. The soaring distrust of Coles and Woolworths has caused the sector to drop 2 places in the industry rankings. Utilities, banks and insurance sectors have also worsened, while consumer products rose by 2 rankings and charities moved up 1 place. Disturbingly, the whole population has become more distrustful in 2024 than it was across the previous 5 years. Before COVID, Australians felt more trusting. However, soaring distrust of executives behaving badly and corruptly has led to a significant shift in consumer attitudes. As a direct result, the entire economy is in net distrust territory. The black line. Green's trust, red is distrust. The moral blindness exhibited by leaders at, for example, Qantas, Harvey Norman, PwC, AMP, Rio Tinto and QBE has contributed to this national fragility. This is a really significant issue, representing a major challenge for the Australian economy. Leaders must prioritise ethical behaviour and transparency to rebuild consumer trust and their social licence. So what's behind this national risk? Well, Australians nominate 3 dominant reasons for distrusting brands. Huge profits, the top line, lack of customer focus, the second green line, and price gouging, the red line. All three reasons have risen sharply in the past year, particularly during the current cost of living crisis. The same leaders who quickly recognised COVID as a crisis failed to recognise the convergence of inflation, interest rate increases and cost of living pressures as a full-blown social and economic crisis. The result? Soaring distrust and dramatic brand damage for those leaders and their brands. Banks, the red line, and supermarkets, the black line, are the industry sectors Australians distrust the most for being too motivated by profit. As you can see from this graph, Australians overwhelmingly call out banks as the biggest offenders. Previously, big banks making large profit announcements have largely gone unremarked. More recently, however, with ongoing mortgage rate increases, cost of living pressures, Australians are increasingly outraged that banks are making such huge profits at their expense. And this has led to a significant decline in bank trust. Similarly, supermarkets have faced criticism for being too profit-driven, but it's the banks that are receiving the brunt of the backlash. Here we see banks, the black line, and supermarkets, the red line, are the industry sectors Australians also distrust most for price hikes and price gouging. But in this case, it's supermarkets that are bearing the brunt of consumers' anger ahead of banks. Banks, the red line, and telcos, the black line, are the industry sectors that Australians distrust the most for not being customer-focused or providing poor service. In this case, it's telcos that are bearing the brunt of consumers' anger, just ahead of banks. But what's happening with individual brand winners and losers? Let's look first at the top 20 winners and losers. First, Australians' most trusted brands. In the top 20, Bunnings again takes the top spot as the nation's most trusted brand. Woolworths and Coles' dramatic exit from the top 20 most trusted list lifted almost everyone else. What's also interesting is that Bendigo Bank has further widened its trust gap with ING. And Australia Post is staging a recovery, jumping 4 places. Commonwealth Bank also improved its position, in stark contrast to the NAB. The top reasons Australians trust brands really come down to the basics of good business: treating customers well and delivering good quality product or service. These are the bread and butter of keeping customers happy, and they go a long way to building trust and brand equity. But as we know only too well, trust isn't the whole picture. So that's trust. But what's happening with the most distrusted brands? After its catastrophic data breach in late 2022, Optus can't shake off its unenviable role as Australia's most distrusted brand. We're often asked what the recovery rate is after a major brand shock like data hacks or royal commissions. And Optus is providing useful insights. We're at 20 months and counting. Facebook, at number 2, is the beneficiary of Optus's inability to make any of its recovery tactics stick. Medibank, on the other hand, is slowly showing real signs of recovery and is now out of the top 10 most distrusted brands. The top reason Australians distrust brands is that they are too motivated by profit. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with making a profit, but when brands are seen as pursuing profit ruthlessly or with moral blindness, this creates distrust among consumers, and particularly among consumers that are hard hit by cost of living pressures. Let's now turn to the all-important charities sector. In this charities sector, the news is mostly good. Over the last 12 months, there have been around 700 mentions of brands or the charity sector in general in our research. Since we began measuring trust and distrust more than 7 years ago, we've now had more than 5,000 mentions. When we look at net trust in the charities sector, we see that there's a lot more green on this chart, that's trust, than red. So that's evidence that charities overall are much more trusted than distrusted. However, trust and distrust have definitely fluctuated over recent years. While charities remain among the most trusted sectors in Australia, the net trust score, that black dotted line, is still lower than the mid-2020 peak, just after the onset of the pandemic. Although it's on the rise, it's interesting to note that due to an increase in trust, the Red Cross has moved up 2 positions over the last 12 months to become the most trusted charity brand in Australia. In a time of wars and conflict, more Australians view the Red Cross positively because of its focus on doing good for all communities globally. The Salvation Army and the RSPCA have both dropped 1 ranking to come in at 2nd and 3rd. Perhaps unremarkably, there are no charities on our list with more distrust than trust. Analysing what makes the Red Cross the top-ranking charity, respondents say it's upfront, transparent, ethical and honest. They say it does what it says it does, saving lives with no profit motivation. We can also reveal that a strong correlation exists between how much money people give to charity and their trust in the sector. In other words, the higher the trust, the higher the donations. This is really important. So the black line at the top of this chart is the net trust of Australians who donate more than $500. Trust's absolutely compulsory before a donor contributes money to a charity. Then, when they do, they also create a relationship with that charity, and that in turn generates trust, creating a virtuous circle. Perhaps unsurprisingly, there's also a close relationship between the value of a donor's savings and investments and the value of their donations to charity. What's a little more surprising is that the relationship's not really proportionate. In other words, double the wealth doesn't equate to double the amount donated to charity. We also looked at the percentage of people who donate to charity in a 12-month period across key demographics and found women are more likely to donate than men. Older people are more likely to donate than younger Australians. This ties in with the previous chart, showing that the amount given to charity increases as wealth increases, and we know that wealth tends to increase with age. So, why do Australians trust charities? When we ask respondents why they trust their nominated charity, we see a really deep appreciation for the charity's good work, their willingness to help others, their ethical behaviour, honesty and integrity, and being on the front line of assistance also resonates with Australians. Rolling up all these verbatim reasons respondents give for trusting charities and categorising them into what we might call key themes, the number one reason we find that people trust charities is integrity and ethical behaviour. Community mindedness and their good work on the ground also resonates with Australians. But when asked why they distrust charities, respondents focus mainly on financial factors, like donations being spent on salaries for executives and staff, that the money donated doesn't go to the actual cause. Another reason for distrust that surfaces each year is that collectors are too pushy and rude if refused. But the dominant reason for distrust in the sector is perceptions of some charities being too greedy and money not ending up where it's supposed to, or that the charities have agendas other than assisting the community or the people in need as their top priority. This is a classic case of generous Australians feeling foolish that they trusted too much. So, why is trust so important to charities? Well, as we've seen, the first reason is donor confidence. Trust ensures that donors feel confident their contributions will be used effectively and ethically, and that in turn encourages additional support and ongoing generosity. Next, reputation and credibility. High trust levels enhance a charity's reputation, which in turn attracts more donors, volunteers and partners, establishing the charity as a credible brand. Equally important is transparency and accountability. Charities that openly communicate their financials, their impact and operations foster trust, reassuring stakeholders particularly donors, of their integrity. Next is increased engagement. Charities need community support. Just think volunteers. Trust fosters deeper engagement from the community, the stakeholders, creating active participation in programs, events, and advocacy. Then there's sustainability and growth. Trust is essential for a charity's growth and its sustainability. It helps secure continuous funding, grants, and the kind of partnerships essential for future operations. And finally, crisis management. In times of crisis, when something goes terribly wrong, a trusted charity with a reservoir of goodwill is more likely to survive and receive continued support and donations, enabling it to respond effectively and simply keep on operating. And that's a wrap. Thank you for joining me to review such an important sector.